Hey Brian, how's it going? I'll start my email off with a little background about myself. My name is Juan. I'm 31 years old and I'm from New Mexico. I'm Native American from a northern tribe. Growing up on the res, there were always stories about giants living in the mountains, coming down only to steal women and eat kids. There were also stories about how the natives had to fight giants to protect their people. And of course, there's always the stories to keep the kids from going out after dark. I'm sure you know there are other stories and superstitions that go along with Native American beliefs and cultures. My girlfriend and I were on our way back to Albuquerque from a weekend trip to Colorado. It was late. It had to be after 11 p.m. or so, and we were driving on 550 passing the Jemez Mountains. As we were driving past, I told my girlfriend about my Sasquatch experience that I had had in the Jemez Mountains. It was back in either 2015 or 16. I was with my mom, my sister, my cousin, and my two aunts. Here in New Mexico, we the locals go pinnin picking and gather the pinnin nuts to eat and sell, and you'll often see people on the side of the road with signs saying pinnins for sale. You can get them raw or even roasted and salted. And now there's even pinnin coffee shops to go along with New Mexico's culture. We had planned to go pinnin picking for the day. My aunt heard of a good pinnin picking spot in the Jemez Mountains that her friend had told her about that was only accessible by four-wheel drive due to how bad the roads were in that area. So my aunt asked me if we could take my truck. The six of us loaded into my crew cab with a cooler packed with lunch and drinks, and off we went. To give you an idea of where we were, we took 550 to Jemez and turned off towards Ponderosa on 290. From there, we got onto Forest State roads. My aunt was giving me directions and telling me where to turn. I've always wanted to go back to that location, but I don't recall the roads and the turns that we took to get there. If you were to look at it on Google Maps or Google Earth, my best guess is it's somewhere on the southeastern side of Jemez Springs. We had reached our destination after driving for some time. And by destination, I mean it looks like this is a good spot to pull off. I had pulled off the road into a clearing and we started pinnin picking. Now, pinnin picking is not for the faint of heart. And it's not for someone who doesn't have the patience for it. You literally have to pick the pinnin off the ground by hand and placing them into a bucket, container, or even a sacrificial pillowcase. I'm sure for others there's more efficient ways of doing it, but for us, this was our process. Being in my early 20s, getting tired and bored of it came only about an hour in. So I decided to wander off and do some exploring of the area. While we were in the mountains, other trucks had passed us in both directions, so it was obvious that there was other people up there. There was no cell reception anywhere in that area, so I decided just to leave my phone in the truck plugged into the charger. I figured if I needed to use my phone, I might as well have a full battery once we got back to town. I had wandered off to the east of the road we had driven in on. After walking for some time, about 30 minutes or so in one direction, I came to an overlook and climbed onto the cliffs to sit and get a better view of the area below. My best guess would be that from top to bottom where I was, it was about 100 feet or so. Below me there were trees and shrubs and high grass in this small valley. And the area I was looking at in front of me had a curve and there was this road that went from left to right. There was a herd of cows grazing below. I sat there and watched them for a bit, and this truck popped up on the road from the right side of the area and it was making its way over to the left side. The cows were in the middle of the road in the path of the truck, so the driver started to honk his horn and roll down the window and throwing his hands around, motioning for the cows to get out of the way. But it was clear that the cows weren't going to budge. Finally, the passenger got out of the truck and started yelling and motioning for the cows to get out of the way. And finally, they moved off to the side enough so that the truck could continue on. After the truck had driven off, the cows continued grazing and were slowly moving to the left of the area. And that's when I noticed that something was moving in the trees above where the cows were. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was just a cow or some cows making their way back to the rest of the herd. But after watching it and focusing on it for a while, I realized that this thing was walking upright, and it was moving from tree to tree, always staying hidden behind the tree and the shrubs for cover. Again, I thought it was a cow because of how wide this thing was. It looked to be the width of a cow when it was standing broadside. My mind was trying to figure out what I was looking at, and then I finally realized that I was seeing shoulders, legs and arms moving and swaying back and forth, and the arms were reaching out for the next tree in front of it as it moved. As I'm writing this email, my heart rate is increasing just thinking about what I saw that day. After seeing the shoulders, legs, and arms, I finally saw the head, and I realized how huge and tall this thing must have been from the distance that I was seeing it from. My best guess was that it was at least 250 to 300 yards away as the crow flies. It looked like a shadow moving, but I could see the legs taking steps as it was walking between the trees and the shrubs. Finally, the sunlight hit it, and I could see that it was a brownish color. This thing was clearly stalking the cows below, and it clearly had no idea that I was watching it from above. Before this thing could get any closer to the cows and make any kind of effort to catch one, I heard this yell or scream coming from the direction that I had first spotted it from. And man, as soon as those cows heard that yell, they booked it like there was no tomorrow across the other side towards the direction where the truck had went. After that, my attention went back to this figure that I saw moving in the shadows of the trees. Just as fast as those cows took off, this thing beelined in the direction that scream came from. There was no more moving from tree to tree trying to be sneaky. It took off in a straight line in the direction where that sound came from. Now, I was already freaking out about what I was seeing, but after that yell, I was frozen. My heart was racing and I had goosebumps everywhere. I had no idea what I had just saw and heard. After this thing disappeared out of sight, I made my way back to my truck. I was running for my phone in case this thing came back, or there was another yell. I wanted to try to capture anything I could on my phone. I got my phone and made my way back to the spot I was at. I sat there and waited, but nothing happened. To landmark where I was and where all this happened, I took a picture of this unique tree, and to this day, I still have that photo in case I ever find myself back in that area. When we all got back into the truck to go home, I didn't tell anybody what I'd experienced because they would have just thought I was joking or messing around. Some time had gone by and we were at some holiday or birthday or cultural celebration when somebody brought up, "Hey, have you ever seen or heard of a Bigfoot?" That's when I told them what I'd experienced that day in the hay maze. Now that my family and close friends know that I'm a believer, they always send me media articles of sightings in New Mexico or buy me Sasquatch items and clothing. For New Mexico being a big state compared to others, the communities are small, and it seems like someone always knows someone who you know through a mutual friend or family member. The native communities are even smaller, where everyone knows everyone. I have a Sasquatch sticker on my truck, and I see other vehicles around town with stickers on them almost daily. It's definitely a conversation starter. I'll be out and about, and somebody will say, "Hey, cool sticker," or I'll be wearing my Sasquatch shirt, and people will ask me, "Are you a believer?" Jokingly, of course. But a few times it's led to some story swapping, and they'll proceed to tell me about somebody they know who has had some kind of experience or an encounter. Well, that's my story. I've only told a handful of people the whole story and where it took place. Other natives in New Mexico will say, "Yep, he's up there, so you saw and heard one." If I was a Sasquatch, I would definitely call the Haymaze Mountains and Wilderness my home. There's plenty of small and big game up there. Rabbits, fox, coyotes, turkey, deer, elk, bears, and cougars. And the water resources from the lakes and the rivers and the streams have plenty of fish in them. And there's also the pinyon nuts and berries, all of which could sustain a Sasquatch diet. On a little side note, my girlfriend's dad and brothers are hunters. She casually told them that I had seen one, and come to find out, they've had experiences and they've heard stories about Sasquatch on their hunting lands, including a story about a Sasquatch seen stealing sheep on a Navajo reservation, one running across a field into the mountains, and another story about a Sasquatch being shot and buried on the reservation. They even had stories about blacked out SUVs going and retrieving the body. This past summer, I was camping out with my girlfriend and her family, and they told me about a local Navajo man who had heard and seen Bigfoot on his property. I met him during this camping trip, and he showed me his phone that was filled with pictures of footprints in the snow and the ground, and he told me firsthand of his encounter stories on the res. All right, last story I'll finish out with is of a close family friend of mine who works for the State Department. He's been in the mountains most of his career. I'm sure he knows every animal and sound there is in the New Mexico mountains. He once told me a story of a scream that he had heard that he couldn't identify, and he believes that it was a Sasquatch. He's also told me about finding footprints. Hearing other people's encounters and experiences on your podcast has given me the courage to write you this email. Thanks, Brian. Keep up the good work, man. I look forward to future shows on Sasquatch Odyssey and That Bigfoot podcast. I listen to both daily. Have a good one. Juan.